So I wanted to do a quick follow-up to my original Notions video, and I'm calling this one Notions in Motion because first we went through how to set up Notions for D&D, and now I'm walking through how I'm actually using it in practice because I think that sometimes they're kind of two separate things. So the first thing that I want to look at is my current campaign, and I'm going to kind of do a little bit of DM prep so I can kind of walk anyone who's new to the program or curious how you use it in mid-campaign and what that might look like. So the first point that I'll make is that I like to draw a little bit of a line in the sand between prep and running at the table, because to me these are two very different functions, and I'm pretty sure a lot of experienced DMs are gonna kind of agree with me. Maybe not all, but I'm sure others have come across this before too. So when I am actually at the table, I have my Notions in front of me, but it's on a tablet and it's a little bit further back because I don't typically need to reference it super often. Once I've done my DM prep, and I usually review that prep right before the session, it's all fresh in my mind anyways. I'm pretty good about holding that stuff in my brain. Just me personally. Also, I tend to be a very improv heavy DM. Most of the stuff that happens at the table is on no paper or no anywhere. It's completely made up on the spot. I think a lot of DMs have experienced this. So your DM prep, or at least me as I do it, borrowing very heavily from the Sly Flourish Lazy DM method, it essentially is that method just through me, relies very heavily on just having like basic outlines. So what I want to do, though, is go through the prep portion and then talk a little bit more about the table portion. So we're going to go into my current campaign, which I'll kind of deliberately be not posting this until after this session, because I think a couple of my players might watch this. So right here we have our current campaign. This is actually my image. This is just a map that I drew and scanned in. I drew it many eons ago, and then I just scanned it in and used an app called Sketchbook, which is a really handy app, to make this image. I like to have a map or central graphic in this spot so that every time I open my campaign, I'm immediately hit with these visuals that just gets me right in the mindset. So this is the last session that we had, which I tried to come up with a creative title, but I didn't this time, and it's just called Dungeon Exits. And the first thing you'll notice at the top here is the picture of my notebook from the table. So when I'm at the table, I prefer to just have a notebook. I just start with a blank page, I do a little doodle in the upper corner, and I just call it whatever episode it is. I didn't even finish the title in this case, it was just episode 3. And then I just do these little dashes. Now, a lot of the little dashes and the note-taking tricks that I use is a combination, mostly inspired by the bullet journal method by Ryder, Caroll. I apologize. And also a good D&D sort of version of that you can find on Ginny D's channel, where she talks about taking fast DM notes, but it's the same concept, and the concept is just take 1 or 2 word notes. You don't need to write full complete sentences. I just write open coffin, male no, female yes. Now, to anyone else, that's going to be nonsense, but to me, I know exactly what that means because I was there. I was running it. And so when you take your notes this way, you're going to know exactly what this means. In this case, they were in 2 tombs, and there was a male tomb and a female tomb, kind of like a ruling couple, and the item they were looking for was found in the female tomb, not the male one. And that's all that means. So it doesn't have to be pretty, it doesn't have to make a ton of sense, it doesn't have to read like a novel, it's just quick jotting. In fact, you'll see when we get closer to the end of the session, as we get down here, I start doubling down, where I have a couple things over here, a couple things over here, and then because I'm left-handed, I tend to write with my notebooks at a very extreme angle, and I couldn't have this at an angle, so I started writing at an angle. And it doesn't have to be pretty, it just has to be functional. So when I'm doing my DM prep, I have all of the same steps from Sly Flourish's Return of the Lazy Dungeon Master book, or his Lazy Dungeon Master style, which is review, strong start, potential scenes, secrets and clues, locations, NPCs, relevant monsters, and rewards. Now you can tell immediately that I don't necessarily have a whole lot of entries in all of this, but that's okay. It was enough to get me going, and like I said, a good portion of everything that happened at the table, I would say at about this line down, was completely improv. They went to an entire festival scene, and I only had a vague idea that there might be a festival because some NPC mentioned it last session maybe, and it turned into this whole big scene. And we turned on, I have hue lights, and we turned on the colored lights, and we played music, and one of my players is a bard, and they got on stage, and it turned into this whole wonderful thing. So a lot of the best stuff can be improv anyway, so I like having some of this stuff as a general outline for what I'm going to be maybe looking to do. I have a whole bunch of NPCs here. They never even met those NPCs. I have a couple of rewards that they ended up keeping. My new favorite method for doing monsters, which I discovered not long after doing my last video, is these toggles. So what I actually like to do is create a new toggle and put in the name of my monster, and then inside that toggle I will put a screenshot of that monster's stat block. And when I'm actually at my table, this allows me to quickly shrink all of the stat blocks up so they don't take up a lot of space. Or if I have one particular monster that they're fighting, I can just tap one thing and then poof, there's everything I need for that monster. And if I want special notes, I can even insert below. So you can click here and do, where is it? Oh. I think they put it over here in the computer version. I'm usually on my tablet often. There's an insert below option under the more actions over here if you're on a tablet, or if you're on a computer you can just click this plus and it will insert a line down here, and then you can just type away your notes for anything special with that monster, and then it all collapses up together when you're done with that monster or not using that monster. I've also taken to doing that with location maps now. So I just grabbed this off Google Images. This is by no means my artwork. It's just because this is my own homebrew session. Typically I will just grab whatever image comes to mind and works. Just make a note, this is not my artwork by any means. In fact, there's a credit down here, but I cannot pronounce that name to save my life. But it is CZEPEKU. And it's a Patreon photo that I just found online. And when you're doing your own campaign in general, you're not as concerned with copyright stuff. Only if you're performing or putting it out there and monetizing do you really need to worry about copyright stuff. For example, this is something from I believe it's called onedungeon.com, and it's a website where you just tap and it poofs out a dungeon, and if you don't like it you tap again and it just poofs out another dungeon, and you just keep tapping or clicking and it just keeps throwing out these randomly generated dungeons. So the first dungeon they went into, which was this dungeon, I didn't know they were going into a dungeon until I was at the table. So I just quickly on my tablet went to this website, tapped a couple times and went, this looks good enough. And they had entered into the first couple rooms, and then the session ended and I was able later to go and put numbers in here again via sketchbook on my tablet, and then underneath have the different rooms and what they were and little notes about them, and all of this is collapsible, so as soon as they're out of that ruin I can just collapse it back up. So in terms of running at the table, I rely with stuff I'm going to reference. I tend to rely on these drop downs because they're really easy to just pop open, see what I need to see, and then close so that I can then see the full outline. A lot of the rest of this stuff I kind of have in my head. Scenes I usually have in my head. The strong start I usually have in my head. This was a fun one where they had a big bad boss that they could hear. And so we kind of went into, they took a turn, the boss took a turn, they took a turn, the boss took a turn, and they sort of ran through the remainder of the dungeon trying to avoid this giant boss fight. So that's sort of during my session how I might use this, and at the very end of my session, when it's all said and done, I'll take a picture. Usually it's just one page, but I will take a picture of my notes like this and I'll just stick it right here at the top I used to stick it at the bottom, but the top I think is better for reference later. So now I have all this here. So now as soon as I want to prep for next session, I can go up to the top here on my little navigation bar, and I'm back on my campaign. So I'm going to hit new episode, and it's going to do its thing. And this is a template that we already put together. It already has all the stuff in here. Now the template was made before I started using some of the drop downs, so the item is a drop down, but the locations aren't yet. So yeah, this is just my template. So this is episode 4, so I'm going to call it episode 4. And let's see, this next session is going to depend really heavily on what the party decides to do. They have a couple options in front of them, but primarily they have one big choice in front of them. They received a mysterious note to travel to another city, but there's also this sort of lingering quest that they haven't quite finished in the current city, so I'm not 100% sure if they're going to decide to travel or not. So I'm going to leave that title for now. Usually here in the review section, per Sly Flourish, I will do the character review, what each character wants, what their goal is. For example, I know my Artificer wants a portable hole and a bag of holding. Not that he's going to get that right away, mind, but they are level 5 now, so they've definitely earned a handful of magical items. But what I like to do is I like to type this stuff out, or something from the last session. For example, they won 500 golds in a music festival via that performance I mentioned earlier. So what I can do is I can kind of put this section as a combination of what happened last time and what are they looking for, what do they want. And this frames the brain. When you do this step first, this basically just puts you in the right mental spot, so as you're generating stuff, as you're coming up with potential scenes down the line, you're keeping your characters front and center. And again, check out Sly Flourish's channel. Definitely check out his book, because it goes into a lot more of these kinds of tactics. He specifically mentions more on the characters under the review section. I have found that I like doing the character focused review, but also the what happened last time review, because fortunately or unfortunately, due to scheduling, sometimes I don't get to see my players for multiple weeks at a time, so it's really handy. And then of course I'm going to come up with some sort of strong start, it won't always be combat, but can be combat, but something to just immediately kick in the scene. Usually something that's going to require a response. So one time we did do combat, another time we did, they hear impending doom or impending combat. There was another time where they walked into the entrance of the dungeon and the strong start was the door closing behind them. Just something to incite movement or incite action, typically is what I'm aiming for there. And what's really cool about doing that is, so let's say I'm sitting here and I'm like, gosh, I don't know what to do for my strong start. Well, let's see. So I can click back over here to my campaign and go to the last session that I had, and then all my notes are right here on top. You don't have to do notes this way. You could just put a little divider and type all of your notes in Notions as you're running it using the same style where you just type a couple words, enter, type a couple words, enter. That would be really easy to do. Me personally, I like to handwrite things. I like the freedom of the pen. These little dash marks, I will often make them all down the side of the page without actually writing anything next to them, because it's almost like a nervous tick where I just sit there and make these dashes and I go back and forth and back and forth, and it kind of keeps my hands busy, and that allows me to pay more attention to what my players are saying. So there's all different kinds of techniques and such to it. But I can always go back here and I can always look at this. I'm often working on my phone or my tablet remotely. I'm often not able to do this at home. So using this picture method allows me the freedom of having something handwritten and tangible and in front of me when I'm actually DMing at the table, which is super critical. I've definitely noticed an improvement in the quality of the gaming at the table when I moved away from digital stuff and more into handwritten stuff, but that doesn't work for my prep. So I can't haul this little notebook around with me everywhere, or I could, but it would be a major pain for me. So using this picture method is kind of the balance that I found between both worlds, where I can have my at the table, tangible, kinetic feel, but then when I'm out and about, I can sit and I can just go in here and I can literally type it all up on my phone, because all I'm doing is generating ideas. Right now the strong start could be, well, there's a lot of different things it could be, and I haven't really set that one to mind yet, so I'm going to come back to that. But one particular scene could be, in fact, I'll show you a trick here. So these little dots next to the blocks in here will allow you to change one block into a different block. So right now this particular block is a to-do block, but I'm going to click on here and I'm going to click turn into, and I'm going to turn it into a toggle list. And then I'm going to say if travel, because if they decide to leave, well, that's a totally different set of potential scenes than if they decide to stay. And so then I can type /to for to do, and I can create a new list of potential scenes that all falls under this travel. There might be a random encounter. There might be a rival at the city. In fact, if your table is one of those tables like mine that just really doesn't, aside from the occasional random encounter or a side dungeon, they're really not interested in the traveling part of traveling. That's more of a work in progress for me as a DM, but for the most part, my players prefer they just, okay, it's been 3 days and now you arrive. So something to keep in mind when you're thinking about these kinds of things. And then if they do arrive, what might they run into? Recently, I came across a Sly Flourish video where he talked about big cities in particular because they can be quite troublesome, because they can be a little too open. I've had problems in the past, and even feedback from my players about things being too open. So I decided that I would have up to 3 things that I could put in front of them. Okay, you arrive in the city. You notice there's a big castle in the back, and then over here is the local dive bar, and then over there is the marketplace where you might find cool weapons. In fact, there's even a stall with some potions. Okay, there you go. There's 3 set pieces that they can immediately interact with or choose to go through. Now, it's an entirely open city. They don't have to do any of those things, but I've found and have gotten feedback in the past where if I just go, okay, you enter the city, what would you like to do? They're at a complete loss. They have no idea. So having set pieces right off the gate for them to see and interact with is helpful. So they might find a marketplace. They might find, in fact, the particular city that they're traveling to has a sort of slum-like section off to one side where all the gnomes live in, like a squalor. So I can say they're going to find the gnome area. And then what this allows us to do is if we go back, if we tab back out to our original spot, and then I can do a TO and highlight the toggle option. Remember to activate any of these blocks, it's just / and then the first couple letters. So /TO toggle list, and then now I can go if stay. And so now what that allows me to do, and if you hit enter, it'll go into another toggle. So I do want to open my toggle and click into it. So now I can TO to do, and now I can come up with different potential scenes if they're going to not travel. And then, for example, they might look for the high priestess that gave them this quest in the first place. They might talk to some of the local NPCs. They might look for the initial NPC they first met when they landed in this strange land. And what this allows me to do is if they choose one and not the other, I can just click these little toggles and boom, it all sucks up into itself and it's all good. And then this also allows me to, if I collapse all of these toggles, it kind of allows my brain to see it in sections. Okay, here's the if they travel potential. Here's if they stay potential. If I have a third option, there might be another toggle. And the more I used Notions after creating my first video, the more I started learning some of these tricks, which I wanted to share, because the first video I made, if you haven't seen it yet, was highly focused on getting all of your stuff put together in motions, coming from the perspective of someone who's been DMing long before they came across this particular program. So you have binders and Google Docs or Word docs, and you have all of these things in different places. So Notions kind of lets you put all those things together in sort of a wiki style archive type thing, which is super, super cool. But then, you know, how do you keep using it going forward? And it's little tricks like this that I found that's made a really big difference. And then pretty much same with any of these others. I found with the secrets, locations, NPCs, and rewards, the regular to-do list type block is good enough. With the monsters, again, I've grown really, really fond of just screenshotting the stat block that I need and putting it here, as opposed to any kind of database method. I tried making a monster database and just entering all of the stats, with the idea being that if I want to reuse a monster, I can just link to it here. But the reason that I quit doing that is because every time I tried to open that monster, it would open in a new page. So I'd have to hit the back button. Whereas if they're fighting multiple monsters, like a big bad and several minions, in fact, if we look here at episode 3, further down, that's exactly what I have. I have a master who happens to have the stat block of a revenant, but I just covered it in the skin of a big bad skeleton with armor because that's what I wanted. And then they also have skeleton minions. So now I can actually have these both open at the same time, or only one at a time, and I found this to be much more workable when I'm actually at the table, as opposed to the database method where I'm flipping back and forth between pages. So it does, I'm very, very fond of skeletons. Personally, skeletons are just my favorite enemy in any video game, anything ever. I just love skeletons, so I use them a lot. So the only downside to doing this drop-down menu is that, say, for example, when they were in here, and I also had a skeleton, or actually I guess this was a ghoul in this case, but if you ever have the same monster multiple times, you will find that, yep, here he is. So if you ever have the same monster multiple times, you'll be copying, pasting the same stat block over and over again, but I think in general, you're probably not going to come across that too often. It's a good idea to swap out your monsters anyway. And in fact, that first episode is a really good example of what I'm talking about, where I used to put my notes on the bottom of the screen. But I was finding that I didn't like having to scroll down. And the only time I'm going to be looking at these is in retrospective anyways. The only time I'm going to pull this up is if I want to see it. And 9 times in 10, I'm going to want to see this before I see all that other stuff, because I already remember what happened, or big things on here will remind me of what happened. You can see it's a little blurry in the corner, but yeah, you can kind of see a good idea of, you know, you might draw a box around something to call attention to it, or cross things out. This is actually combat notes over here in the corner. I'm just doodling on the side. But doing it that way and having a free blank notebook page in front of you that you can just freely mess up is so freeing on the mind, and you're less focused on, you know, doing your notes in the exact right way, and you're more focused on what's going on at the table. That's why something like this is perfect for at the table, and why something like this, which is structured and easy, and one click, there's your options, one click, boom, you're done. That's, I find, much better for prep specifically, because you want it to be structured and you want to be able to just lay your eyes right on it. That's why all of these titles have big, strong, bold text to them, so that I can just immediately see them, because this is more for reference, whereas the notebook is more, and the notes are more in action. So hopefully that kind of helps give you guys an idea of how to use this now you've set everything up in it, how you might use it going forward. And I hope you found it interesting. Feel free to check out anything else I have on my channel. It's mostly gaming related, and I'll be honest, that's because I'm a busy person and I love video games, and video game content is a little easier to produce. I do have other animated videos that will be coming out eventually. They're very, very time intensive to make. But hopefully you found this interesting and helpful. And if you have any ideas on what you would use it for, or how you use Notions differently, or even something that you use instead of this, go ahead and post it below, because someone perusing this might want to go looking for more ideas. So thank you so much, and I'll catch you guys next time.